Welcome to Team 3ST's story of the initial phases of our design thinking project focusing on stereotyping in education. This project is for EDL 655 Summer 2015 session. This has been a very rapid-fire and time-intensive phase as first-time participants in a design thinking project. Thankfully, due to our team members Sarah Chai, Michelle Snyder, Jose Mendoza, and Matthew Decking, as well as the regular support from our professors Dr. Cheryl Ward and Sandra Liu, it's been a richly academic and personally enlightening journey thus far. Initially asked to look at a social justice aspect within education, we all came to the table with multiple ideas to begin considering. Because each of us teaches at very different schools, we wanted to tap into an issue that impacted us all, an issue that each of us could put equal passion into. Dr. Ward had sent out an email just a couple days prior that targeted stereotyping, and because of the email and initial research by our entire team, as well as due to the racially charged events that have taken place across our country over the past year, I think our entire team very quickly saw the chance to address the issue of stereotyping as an opportunity to work on a project that each of us, as well as our fellow staff and students as end users, could greatly benefit from. Let's begin by taking a look at our discovery phase of the design thinking process.
In our discovery phase, once we figured out that all of our team members were passionate about studying stereotyping in education, we got to work determining our end users and devising our research methods. We figured out that with this topic, we really have two end users, students and teachers. We decided that the best way to understand our end users and their needs would be to gather data via a survey to administer to students and also to conduct interviews with experts on stereotyping. My interview with Dr. Ward yielded the strong point that we can't deal with people's beliefs in the school setting. We can only deal with a person's actions and behaviors. Dr. Ward also highlighted the internal process of becoming aware of one's own stereotyping behavior and bias, and then the external process that involves behavior and action. This will also be really important for us to address as we move forward through this process. Dr. Ward also suggested that empathy comes when we study the end user as part of the process of design thinking and critical thinking. We must have open eyes, open minds, and get everyone thinking about their thinking. In order to get rid of stereotypes, people must learn to recognize bias, clear it, and continue on. She said that the best way to help people realize their stereotyping is through asking questions to help them recognize their bias and the effects of their actions. Dr. Ward's input was vital to our understanding of not only what stereotyping is, but how devastating it is in education, and the idea that we have to do something about it, and that we can only really deal with people's actions. So we have to help people first realize their bias, and then help them understand what they can do to change their actions in relation to it.
Our group's interview with Dr. Lindsay was very eye-opening. Dr. Lindsay has experienced stereotyping through a different lens. She went to graduate school where she was one of the only Caucasians. She had African American colleagues say to her, "You're white. They will listen to you." Her experiences have definitely shaped her work she does today. It was incredible to talk to her briefly about her text that I had read for EDL 640. I let her know that the breakthrough questions are tough to formulate, but are so needed to overcome the barrier statements.
As a team, we came up with a survey questions during one of our Google Hangouts. Matthew took the initiative to create it on Google Forms. Then I administered it to my students, one of the groups of end users. During a 2-week period, the survey was taken by 16 young adults in 12th grade who are between the ages of 18 and 26. These students are considered to be at risk, as they are mostly dropouts and refugees. They had a vague understanding of the term stereotyping.
There were several ideas of how to best display and organize the data so that our team, who are physically spread out around San Diego County, would all be able to participate in the dynamic interpretation phase. We initially discussed Google Draw, but realized there were limitations as far as the size of the presentations we were hoping to produce. We then looked at Glogster, which had a nice aesthetic, but was limited in collaborative capabilities. Finally, through reaching out to her sphere of influence, Sarah Chai was able to start a poster using an online application called Mural.ly. This application allowed our 4 team members to collaboratively work at the same time on our data organization and provided a nice aesthetic for the data as well. Our team worked for a number of hours, each on their assigned responsibilities, posting what we individually deemed important information to include from our survey and interviews. Michelle focused on interpreting and organizing her interview ideas from Dr. Ward. Sarah did the same with information collected from our interview with Dr. Lindsay. Jose and I divided up the survey and online research data and created data graphics for our poster. Once all our data was posted on Mural.ly, as a team we began to drop our information into categories or trends. We picked out from the data. This was a great process because some of the categories were quite obvious, while others were not. And as individuals, we really had to justify and clarify and sell some of the decisions and ideas to the other teammates. A wonderful learning experience. Some observations, interesting connections, and interpreted data that Team 3ST considered included that there may be an age threshold or age appropriateness for students engaging in conversations around the idea of stereotyping. 5th, or better yet 6th grade, may represent the point at which these conversations around stereotyping need to begin in classrooms. What's interesting is that according to our small survey of approximately 60 students ranging from grades 7 through 12, though 86% of them, or 86.7% of respondents were 12th graders, racial stereotyping topped the list of stereotypes the students were most familiar with, supporting the research we had found on the internet. However, according to our humble survey, gender stereotyping was the 4th most familiar type of stereotyping. Only 8.3% of students indicated familiarity with gender stereotyping, falling below cultural stereotyping at 16.7% and stereotyping of groups of individuals at 10%. What this tells our team is that there may be a lack of understanding from the student perspective that gender stereotyping is obviously prevalent in schools across the nation, or that gender stereotyping for the group surveyed is simply observed far less. Conversely, it may even indicate that students have become overly comfortable with gender stereotyping in our schools, making it virtually second nature and unquestioned. After the interview with Dr. Lindsay, it seems quite apparent to our team that if we don't focus our conversations, professional development, and solutions from the top down, meaning from educators to our students, we may not be creating a wholly viable and effective remedy for stereotyping in education. We've also noticed that with more time, we may be able to look at results from our survey in different ways. It would be interesting to dive into the difference in responses from males and females. For example, after looking a bit deeper at the data from the survey, I found it interesting that 1/4 of female respondents claimed that they would intervene when observing stereotyping taking place by standing up and saying this is wrong, whereas only 1/15 of males in the same situation would have been willing to do the same. Yet another interesting finding from our survey is that 57.3% of our survey respondents say they experience stereotyping either often or always. It may be safe to assume that over half of students regularly experience or see stereotyping taking place around them by the time they're in 12th grade. This number may be higher if we were to specify gender stereotyping, which again tells our team that there may be a lack of understanding from the student perspective that gender stereotyping is obviously prevalent in schools across the nation, or that gender stereotyping for the group surveyed is simply observed far less. Though it was late when all of this had been completed and all of this data had been kind of arranged in this great format that you see on this slide, we decided to push on with the question formulation technique, or QFT, and decided upon our overall focus and 3 how might we questions. After it all, it's exciting to think that we have a solid place from which we can move forward into our next phase of ideation. The following slides are a result of our group's efforts during the QFT process.
One of the categories we constructed from our data is that our assumptions and beliefs lead to behavior and action. These assumptions develop as a result of experiencing a variety of influences, including media sources, social circles, modeled behaviors and attitudes of adults, and many others. With the strong influence of stereotypes in mass media, how can educators counter both student and teacher assumptions towards others? Matthew connected this idea to our interview with Dr. Lindsay, who observed that stereotypes grow out of assumptions people have about groups of people, and unless we can test those assumptions, we continue thinking those assumptions are real. This understanding impacts education greatly, as we see it consistently in classrooms across the nation, supported and proliferated not by students, but by their teachers and administrators. With this in mind, it becomes quite obvious that education is a key component to the solution, both for students and educators alike, but perhaps most importantly with educators. After the interview, it seems quite apparent that if we don't focus our conversations, professional development, and solutions from the top down, meaning from educators to our students, we may not be creating a wholly viable and effective remedy for stereotyping in education. Even though we are not at the finding solutions phase, our group wonders if utilizing the media to dispel stereotypes could be part of the solution.
The next major area of focus from our QFT session was this idea that we realized that everyone engages in stereotyping at one point or another, even if unintentional, and that we must address the adults in stereotyping as well as our students. Dr. Ward pointed out during our interview that you can't teach the students without addressing the adults as well. The adults are the role models, and if a healthy school culture is to be created and sustained, the adults have to be aware of their biases as well. This will prove to be a much different endeavor than working with students on stereotyping, as adults have cultivated and lived with their perceptions of the world and how it works for a long time and may be set in their ways. But it must be done, and so that's where we'll be spending some time as we move on into the next phase of the design thinking process.
According to our survey data, students have experienced stereotyping in one form or another. Based on these results, as well as the interviews and overall research analysis of the findings, we had multiple follow-on questions during the question formulation technique process. After much discussion, we came up with a third question which delves further into this topic. How can we use what we've learned to develop appropriate solutions?
So, in a mere 2 phases of this design thinking process, Team 3ST has covered a considerable amount of ground. We've conducted some appropriate research, including 2 expert interviews and a student survey on their experience with stereotyping. We've mulled through the interpretation phase, looking to make correlations with our data and organizing that information in a logical fashion. And finally, we've worked through our QFT process, really recognizing our continued focus on the question, how can we better address stereotyping in education? This next phase, ideation, promises to present a whole new set of challenges as we begin to look at formulating ideas that will address and potentially present some solutions to our question.